this is the big alpha in the US environment. It's the largest by assets as well as by market capitalization. It's been around forever. It's the premier operator in that market. It also owns Chase, so that gives it quite a big retail exposure as well as this international bond, corporate finance, wholesale banking environment stuff. $358 billion, so that puts it in the first division of US companies. Price earnings ratio is 14.6, and that's after a substantial share price run-up that we'll see in a minute, and the dividend yield is 2.2%. So it did pretty well. Its CEO, Jamie Dimon, navigated the global financial crisis pretty well, and it's done super in the recent times. Can it continue, though, to do even better than it's done already?
Do you know, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Paul, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, since in the past year, this thing's risen by about 44-45%.
Exactly.
It's double what the S&P's done.
So it hasn't done as well as Bank of America has done. It's done better than Wells Fargo, and I think it's done better than Citi. So those are the big four US banks.
That's right. And I think it's riding on optimism coming out of the Trump administration. We're going to see tax reform. We're going to see this economy moving an awful lot
better. Less regulation in banking.
Absolutely. And we got a little indication of that last week.
Let me rephrase that. It's not like less regulation per se. It's also some of the stuff that might have restricted them further, like being able to be involved in different kinds of business. Excessive paper forming and compliance reporting is not going to be part of the future.
And look, I mean, the Trump administration wants to reverse a lot of Obama's regulation, things like Dodd-Frank, for example, which I think would be good for the banks. You know, it may not be so good for investor protection, but probably good for the banks. So I think banking generally has ridden on that wave of optimism. But JP Morgan, as you say, very much ahead of the pack, getting into fintech slowly but surely.
Yes, they bought a company called WePay recently, which again would give them more know-how in order to improve their own processes, because obviously they're a big card issuer as well as a card transaction capturer.
Do you know, it's fascinating, and you go to the US regularly, Paul. In the US, you don't really have a national banking network. And in terms of technology, they're way behind South Africa.
Yes.
It's bizarre.
Interbank really payments are slow.
Very slow.
So many businesses in the US still write paper checks.
That's right.
I mean, individuals write paper checks. So the scope for them to move people onto the apps, onto the online banking, and to stop using those systems and to stop going to branches is also high.
It's huge. So I think JP Morgan very much at the forefront of that. It's a quality operation. Jamie Dimon, you know, he's expressed concerns recently about things like Bitcoin and stuff like that. But nevertheless, he's a guy who's very much in charge of the situation.
So he's 61. Do you think he's going to continue for a good long while yet?
No, I don't think so. I think he'll be stepping down in the not too distant future. He had a bit of a health scare recently.
Exactly, he had a cancer scare. Do we have a share chart? Because it's trading at about $102 a share. And you can see that's at an all-time high. So I guess that is the only concern, is that maybe it's trotted along too high, although it's only on a PE of 14. And then we did raise this earlier, but interest rates in the US are now set to rise because the Fed, of course, kept interest rates really, really low. And so in a somewhat positive environment with positive economic reports coming in, better than expected GDP, and then interest rates starting to rise a bit, that gives them a little bit of a margin uplift.
And the endowment effect, absolutely. So that's looking good. Price to book, 1.5 times. A bit expensive from that metric, but nevertheless, you know, I think investors are prepared to pay up to buy this kind of quality.
So we'll go hot on this one.
Oh no, hot, definitely.
Yeah, and we're hot on it too. At Vestact, we had owned Wells Fargo in a lot of client accounts, and we've been recently making the switch across to JP Morgan.